Occasionally, I borrow my husband's car. In the narrow lane where we live, I have been known to clip the wheel or risk a scratch or two from the hedge. I have a choice about that. I can brush it off. It is only a car, and he probably won't notice, at least not right away. But if I explore that slightly uncomfortable feeling and work it through, I realise it will matter to him, and he'd rather I was upfront about it. My decision about what to say when I get home changes. That's a small decision to make. Over the last couple of years, many of us have made huge life decisions. We've moved home, bought houses, changed jobs or careers, got dogs, had babies, got married, broken up. Big decisions. We've also made countless smaller decisions about travel or health, money, how and when to meet up with friends or family or take a holiday. If the number of unwanted pets is anything to go by, we're not always happy with the decisions we make. Have you ever gone for the easy option, given in to the loudest voice, and regretted it later? In this series, we're learning how to pause and ask ourselves questions before we make that choice, in the hope of making better decisions and having fewer regrets in life. These 5 questions are helpful for everyone, whether or not you're a follower of Jesus. Today, we're looking at question number 3, the conscience question. Will I ignore my conscience or pause and explore it? Will I pay attention to the inner tension? Before we get to that, if you're a Christian, Chris reminded us at the start of the series that there is an overriding principle. Jesus told his followers when they asked him what's the most important thing in life, he said, love God and love other people. So even before we get to those 5 questions that help us make decisions, this is our starting place. Does whatever I'm thinking of doing bring honour to God? And will it bless other people? If the answer is no to either of those questions, then we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't think it. We shouldn't say it, or send it, or post it, or forward it. Sometimes this is enough to help us decide. Just thinking about Jesus' priorities could help us eliminate some of those regrets that we carry around with us. But other questions can be helpful too. So far, we've asked ourselves the integrity question. Am I being honest with myself? Really? And we've asked ourselves the legacy question. What story do I want to tell? You can catch up with how those questions can help your decision making on FBC's YouTube channel. But I have a third question for us today that's helpful for everyone. The conscience question. Considering this question before you make a move could transform the rest of your life. Sometimes when I'm faced with a choice, I realise something's bothering me. It's hard to put my finger on it, but it's making me uncomfortable, just a bit uneasy. Something about it doesn't feel right. Some people call that a red flag moment. Like when I've scratched the car and I'm considering keeping quiet about it. What do I do with that inner tension? Do I pause and reflect on it, work out what the issue is? Or do I rush past and ignore it? When something is bothering you, do you let it bother you? Get to the bottom of that feeling and weigh up whether it affects your decisions? If something doesn't feel right, it might not be right. So the question is, will I ignore my conscience or pause and explore it? You're maybe thinking this is just for people who follow their emotions and you follow the facts. But actually, when we get a red flag moment, it's our brain that alerts us. Our conscience is a facet of our intellect, not just our emotions. So maybe if you pause, more facts will emerge that help you make a good decision. But it's not always easy to explore our conscience. We're in a hurry, or someone else is in a hurry. Perhaps no one else in the room seems bothered by the proposed course of action. It's not illegal. No one's going to know. No one's getting harmed. It's possible to ignore our conscience so often, rationalize our poor choices, make so many excuses, that our conscience becomes corrupted and we hardly ever notice that feeling of unease anymore. It's too easy to brush past. But if we stick with it, we can't truly shake that feeling, that inner tension, that something's not quite right. We need to pay attention to that inner tension. Will I ignore my conscience or pause and explore it? The other thing that can happen is that someone else points out something you hadn't thought about. I was happily choosing cups for my son's wedding. Simple, right? When my daughter asked if I'd considered the environment. Irritating. She didn't follow up, but it gnawed at me and eventually affected my choice. Maybe it's your mum who asks, "Is that even legal?" Or your friend who says, "What will your husband or your wife think about that? Does your boss know? Can you afford that? Doesn't your contract rule that out? I thought you were on a diet." Well, you might feel like discounting their input. What do they know? They're no expert. They've made plenty of mistakes. It's annoying, but they may still be right. And their input is worth exploring if it's thrown up a red flag for you that just won't go away. Face up to the job offer, the invitation, the relationship, the deal, the fine print. What exactly about it is making you uneasy? If something bothers you, let it bother you. Explore it, think it through, follow up until either it goes away or you decide to go a different way. The Bible has a great real-life example of what this looks like. Someone who was about to seize an opportunity that would change their life forever, a defining moment. But they paused. They explored their conscience even under intense pressure and chose a different path. The guy was called David, a youngest son, a shepherd, chosen out of the blue as a boy, anointed by a prophet in the custom of the day to be the next king of Israel, a replacement for the existing King Saul, who was not serving his people well. David would be king, but not yet. He had to wait, although he knew what his destiny was. When he courageously killed Israel's #1 enemy, Goliath, single-handedly, he became super popular and pressure grew for him to take the throne. But King Saul resisted, hoping his own son would replace him. When his attempt to murder David failed, he put David on the wanted list, called up his army and hunted him down. Meanwhile, hundreds of men, including many fugitives from the law, joined up with David, and they're hiding in the desert hills. On this particular day, nature called. Saul halted his 3,000 men and went into a cave to relieve himself. Can you believe this is in the Bible? And then, what are the odds of this? Saul walked alone into the exact cave where David and some of his men happened to be hiding. Coming in from the bright light, Saul saw nothing and squatted down. David's men whispered in the darkness at the back of the cave, "Is this for real? Surely it's a sign from God." They reasoned that God delivered Saul on a plate so that David can kill him and become king. This is it. Once Saul is dead, they can all go home. The civil war will be over with only one casualty. It's a perfect opportunity. Kill the king before the king kills you, or stay an outlaw. David was under intense pressure to act decisively, to seize the moment. He crept forward, knife in hand. Slitting Saul's throat unawares would be so simple. But something didn't feel right. He hesitated. That red flag went up. David didn't ignore his conscience. He paused. He explored that uneasy feeling. He let what was bothering him bother him. What would happen if he did it? David thought he knew. There would be loud cheering in the cave, that's for sure. The civil war would probably end and he would be greeted as king. He is seconds away from making that happen. But it doesn't feel right. God made Saul king. Who is David to do this, even if the king is trying to kill him, even if he would rule the country better? And he couldn't be sure of the outcome if he committed murder in cold blood. Would this be something he would regret for the rest of his life? Did he want to explain to his kids, his grandkids, exactly how he became king? David paid attention to the tension in his gut and he changed course midstream. He was conscience-stricken. David reached out and without Saul even noticing, sliced off the corner of Saul's discarded robe and then retreated into the cave. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed one, or lift my hand against him." The men were shocked. "Let me do it. The fugitives were so close to going home. We'll do the job for you, no problem. He deserves it." But David didn't allow them to attack Saul. That would be wrong too. Saul left the cave, completely unaware of his close shave, to rejoin his men and continue the manhunt. Until he heard a voice. David called out Saul's name. Everyone went still. "My lord, the king." Everyone looked. David, the man they're hunting, is standing in the mouth of the cave that Saul just exited. David bowed down low. He had something in his hand, the corner of Saul's royal robe. The king checked his robe. There's a chunk missing. Everyone recognized at that moment that David was the better man. David was the hero in his own story. He spared Saul's life when everyone knew Saul would have taken his. David said to Saul, with everyone listening, "The Lord gave you into my hands in the cave, but I spared you. May the Lord judge between you and me. I'll let God settle the outcome of this conflict. I'll not take the matter into my own hands. I will not use your bad behavior as an excuse for mine. I will not be like you." David paid attention to that inconvenient, irrational feeling. And he did the right thing. But he had no idea what the result would be. All eyes are on Saul. What would he do now? Rally his troops and attack David and his men who were cornered? Or give David a head start and then pursue him? Saul was humiliated by David's humility. He too was conscience-stricken. He wept aloud. Then he went home. David's decision to choose the higher path inspired Saul to do the same. Months later, Saul was in a battle with Israel's enemies. A random archer fired an arrow randomly into the Israelite army, and Saul was critically wounded. When word of his death reached the city, they proclaimed the new king. David took the throne without killing his king. But David didn't know this was how it would work out when he was in the cave. That would have made his decision a whole lot easier. That's why we need to pay attention to that inner tension. If you want to be the hero in your own story, don't ignore your conscience, but pause and explore it. Pay attention to that inner tension. You and I dare not trust what we think is our ability to control or manipulate the future. Jesus was the master at creating space for people to explore their conscience. One of Jesus' fisherman friends, John, records for us the day when a group of self-righteous religious leaders brought a woman to Jesus, explaining she'd been caught in adultery. Should they stone her as the ancient law required? Jesus didn't respond for a long time. Then he said, "The sinless one among you, go first. Throw the stone." There was a long pause. Sinless? Suddenly they were all uneasy about their decision. Jesus created space for them to experience their discomfort and explore their conscience before they acted. And one by one, they walked away. Their decision changed. I wonder what decision you are wrestling with now. It probably falls somewhere in between murdering a king and confessing to your partner about scratching the car. But the principle is the same. If there's something you can't put your finger on about a proposal at work, or someone else makes a comment about your financial decision or about a relationship, and you get that uneasy feeling, then pause and explore it. Let it bother you until you know why. This may be God's way of protecting you or your family. There may be another option that you didn't know was available. You'll be glad you paid attention to that inner tension. So, will you ignore your conscience today or pause and explore it? Do you sense possible danger ahead? Maybe it's your health, a habit, or a secret that you're hiding. Is there an inner tension that deserves your attention right now? Maybe you've got really good at ignoring it, but deep down something is still bothering you. This would be a good time to find a trusted friend to talk it through with and maybe pray together. Stopping to ask this question when you're facing a decision or when you need to respond to a situation will lead you to make better decisions in the days and months ahead. And better decisions will lead to fewer regrets.